Hi, and welcome back to the History Hut. I'm Jim, this is Dr. K, and here we'll be wrapping up our discussion.
We will indeed.
On Barbarians on the Move. So we were talking about Rome. Was this what we were just talking about, the fall of the Roman Empire?
Yeah, I mean, the empire splits into east and west. It doesn't die. I mean, it's a long, long strangulation of the Roman Empire, but it splits into east and west. The west is three capitals, Rome, Milan, and Ravenna, and then the east is called the New Rome, and that's Constantinople. And so that's
a very big word. Can you spell it?
IT. Oh, my dad would be so proud. Didn't fall for the oldest trick in the book. So under Emperor Justinian, who was actually Macedonian, there was one more attempt to reunite the Roman Empire to kind of save it. Justinian is probably more famous to you for his law codes. It's the basis of civil law in the West. But he's famous in this instance because he marches out and beats the Vandals in North Africa in the 6th century and then rampages through Spain and Gaul and Italy, and it looks really good. You know, he's really going to be successful. And then he's halted in the end by the Franks and the Ostrogoths in the west, and he's pushed back by a new terror in the east, and that's the Avars. So it just doesn't go well for him, and the empire is just completely overrun by, you know, Avars and Bulgars and Slavs, and so it, you know, it is a long, long process before it kind of collapses. But Constantinople effectively becomes the new Rome outside of Europe. But you know, the Dark Ages are about to fall on the rest of Europe because the Romans are gone.
So what were the barbarians like?
Oh, they were lovely people.
Well, they don't sound very barbaric.
Once they come into Western Europe, they settle quite quickly, and they settle to farming. They're not used to the clay-filled lands, especially in Northern Europe, so you see some technological innovations, and one of them is called the Moldboard Plow. And if you like kind of cause and effect answers for things, the Moldboard Plow is seen as a really important innovation, a really important change, because of some really practical things that it does. Well, first of all, I mean, obviously it's really heavy, so it cuts deeper into the soil. That's good. But it's so heavy that it needs 8 oxen to pull it instead of 2, and this is where the change comes. So most people would probably have been able to afford to have 2 oxen and, you know, keep them alive through the winter. But no family could afford to have 8 oxen. So one of the suggestions is that you start to see families gathering together to work the land. So you would need maybe 4 families to gather together, and so you'd have the 8 oxen. And so this, it's suggested, means that you also have to start to decide how you're going to divide up the land. So you have to have some kind of organized way of deciding who gets what. And you don't want somebody to get all the best land and somebody to get all the worst land. So they do things like they would draw lots for the land. So you would farm, say it was a big piece of farming land. You know, you and I, we don't know much about farmland.
Yeah.
It was acres and acres and acres. Yeah. It was football fields long. And
half section.
So quarter section as well. So
they didn't have pickup trucks back then, though.
No. So you would have maybe, you'd have piece 1 I get, and you might get piece 2, and I might get piece 5, and you might get piece 4, and somebody else would get piece 3, and somebody else, you know, so you'd have bits of land kind of all over the place, and you wouldn't get to work the same land year after year. So in a sense, it stops people from being innovative, because you don't want to make all these changes to your piece of land if you're not going to get it back the next year. But on the other hand, it seems to lead to the start of village life, because you start to have families that are going to have to kind of act together. And they also learned that they're going to have to keep land in fallow, so they can't use all the land all the time. So you start to see, you know, fallowed land, and they have very few domestic animals, so fertilizing is a bit of a problem for them. They don't seem to use night soil, so a bit of a problem. But You know, generally speaking, most people in Europe were farmers. They would live in these small villages. The houses were timber framed. You'd have that wattle and daub walls, and they would grow mainly wheat and barley and rye. And then they start growing legumes, so lentils and peas. And they raised cattle, and they would have pigs and sheep and goats and horses. And in less fertile areas, you'd see more sheep and goats. And, horses are raised for riding and for warriors. Families would practice whatever domestic crafts they brought with them, lots of weaving, and they would make tools from antler and from bone. This would be traditional by this time. And then you would have things like village potters and village blacksmiths too, blacksmiths, specialist metal workers as well. So you have kind of things like that. It's also quite interesting that they didn't cremate people when they died. And you notice I added when they died in case you thought it was just like talking about barbarians, just blowing people up. So they people were buried, and they would have their grave goods placed with them. So usually jewelry for women, some personal piece for women, and iron weapons with men. And often you would get, pottery as well. There's some examples from those books that I was mentioning about what you would see in highborn people's graves. You know, who cares? Who cares if it's a peasant? It's probably got one thing with him, a Tupperware container, and that's it. But if you were looking, for instance, at the Anglo-Saxon grave of King Raedwald at Sutton Hoo, the vessel that he was buried with was a 89-foot-long boat, and also his weapons and all the dining equipment that he would need for a big feast in the afterlife. And the grave goods came from all over Europe, from as far off as Byzantium, so Constantinople area. We were talking about Childeric earlier on. Childeric, the father of Clovis, first real Merovingian leader. Childeric's grave had 50 horses that had been sacrificed and had hundreds of little gold bees with garnets inset in them. And Napoleon took that symbol of the bees as his symbol for his rule in 1804 to link himself to Childeric as one of the first great barbarian kings. And in Childeric's, I think Childeric's grave is the first major, the first kind of major non-looted grave that the archaeologists had access to. So it's the richest burial in this period of the Dark Ages, and it's got all sorts of things in it, weapons and signet rings, and of course all the gold and everything. So quite interesting. Again with the archaeologists digging stuff up, eventually they were bound to find a grave somewhere, and so we have that. People's social organization, they followed chiefs and kings. The kings, of course, claimed descent from their gods. The Anglo-Saxons maybe from Woden. We've talked about this before, the mandate of heaven, divine rights, kingship. We have indeed. So the Merovingians, it's a kind of long, complex name, Childeric and Clovis, they claim to be descended from Merovech, whose dad was a river god, part sea beast, part bull, and part man. And, of course, his mom went in for a wee swim in the river and ran into the river beast. So then you get Merovech.
See, to me, that's only 1/3 of river action there.
Oh, yeah,
I think
that's true.
2/3 of you wouldn't be too comfortable in a river.
Which part is in which part of his body as well? Kind of frightening. So did he look like a sea beast coming out of the water, or was that the man part? And she's like, oh, he looks pretty nice, and then she's like, he's a river beast.
He's a fish.
Yeah, he's a fish. Yeah, that just
and also a bull.
That just doesn't sound so good. So so this whole idea of divine kingship goes, as we've seen, works very well when things are going okay, but in the bad times you might be replaced. Usually still by a member of your own family, but nonetheless replaced. So these people that come within the borders of the empire, they're certainly influenced by the Roman example, and I talked before about how some of them had actually been within the Roman Empire for a long time, so many of them had been there for decades. Some held Roman military positions, others married into the top Roman families. So, you know, all sorts from people just freshly arrived from the east to people that have been there for a while. The social structure, the traditional one, kin groups, male-dominated households. There were penalties. These are called vergelds, spelled with a W, vergelds, for harming women of childbearing age. But it's class-based, and we've seen a lot of this, class-based stuff. The amount depended on your social status. So if it's a high-born woman of childbearing age, you're going to have to hand over quite a bit more. The marriages were arranged. The potential husband paid the girl's father to symbolically purchase the paternal authority over her, you know. Well, I mean, you know, if you think about it, weddings today, the father still gives the bride away, you know, gives her to the new husband. So still all that paternal stuff going on. Families,
but we all know that women control the households now.
That's true. That's true, and it's the way it should be. So families guarantee the good behavior of their own members, and so they're held responsible or accountable for any crimes from members of the family. So no one trusted a kinless person. Nobody trusted. If, you know, suddenly a stranger marched into your little village, everybody would be like, whoa, who does he think he is?
Don't talk to strangers.
Yeah, because if he does something wrong, you can't get any money out of his family, or you can't go on a vendetta or a killing spree or whatever your little heart
that's what it's all
desires. You can't do any of that stuff because he hasn't got any family. So people are really leery of that. So everybody have to know who everybody's connected to.
That's where gossip was born.
That's where, yeah. Ooh, I know who he's related to. Yeah. So religion becomes very useful. Kings and chiefs, of course, use their own pre-Christian beliefs, not pagan beliefs, pre-Christian beliefs, and then later on Christianity to legitimize their rule. They use religion as an excuse for conquest. Oh, he's not like us. He doesn't believe the same thing as us. Let's go and kill all his people. But even in the Christian period, when they do become Christians, you could say that you could say, oh, that guy over there, his people, you know, him and all of his people, they're heretics. They're Christians, but they don't believe the same way that we believe, and then it was okay to take them down. So it was fine to go and attack another group of people if they didn't believe the same as you. And the best example of this is that most of the Goths were Arians, that's Arians, from followers of the priest Arius, and they didn't accept the idea of the Trinity, God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, three gods in one, you know. So they didn't accept that. That was established at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. So the Merovingians could then go out and conquer any of the Goths and just say, well, you're all heretics. You don't believe you don't believe the things that the church believes. So it's okay for us to come out and take you down. Most Western Europeans would become, if they had not already by the Merovingian period, become Catholic. But they become Catholic because their rulers converted. So it's when Clovis converts to Christianity, which, I mean, there isn't any other kind of Christianity really before the Reformation. You don't have Protestants, so it's just Catholics. So it's not that people in Western Europe necessarily knew anything about the Christian faith or Catholicism. It just, most of them held what we would call, you know, pre-Christian or pagan beliefs. They prayed to their old gods, and the church had to work really hard, and that's why there were so many missionaries racing about through Europe trying to explain to people in their own language, so in kind of low culture terms, explain about the faith. So the church has to work really hard to get them to turn to this new God, the Christian God. So someone like Clovis, he was baptized in 496 AD, and then he told all of his people that they were now, you know, Orthodox Catholics. So he's like, and we're all Christians now. And the reason that he converts is because, well, first of all, his wife is a Christian. That was another tactic of the church. Get highborn women who are Christians, marry them off to these barbarian kings, and then insist that the children be brought up as Christian. Good idea. So he's married to this chick, and she's Christian, and so he converts, but he doesn't convert because he has to. He converts because he's been losing a couple of little battles. He's been out at war, and things haven't been going very well. And he's like, really, are my gods even listening to me? And of course gets the approach, and like, hey, our God's pretty good, you know. So he converts to Christianity, and from that point on, he keeps winning. And he's like, this is brilliant. I really like this new God. So he's happy about the new God. So anyway, it's Childeric and Clovis, these descendants of Merovich, who are they're also called the Franks. Remember, we've got the Alans, the Franks, and the Normans later on. So the Franks, they come for a while at least to dominate in the West. And so this is the group of all the groups that we were talking about. This is the group that comes to dominate. So you have Childeric dying in about 481. Clovis's son rules at the age of 15, and he rules until 511. He's baptized in 496. He defeats the Visigoths in 507. And then he follows this by defeating a whole string of all those people that we were talking about, whose names we don't have to go into again. And before his death, all of modern-day France, except for a little strip along the Mediterranean, is part of this Merovingian kingdom. And so he establishes the first great barbarian kingdom. It's the first kind of new European order after the fall of Rome. He has this Christian wife, Clotilda, who, encourages him to convert, but really it's the success in war that manages to make the change. And he actually holds a mass baptism of all of his soldiers. There's about 3,000 of them.
Wow.
Says, right, okay, now we're all Christians, so now we'll all win. He makes his capital at Paris. He has the pre-existing code of law, the kind of custom law of his people written down. So the code of the Franks written down. He conquers on ideological grounds. You're Goths, you're Arians, I'm taking you down. That's okay. And he tries to adapt what he can remember his father was a general in the Roman system, so he tries to adopt and adapt the Roman way of governing. So he revives the Roman office of count. Think of the count in Sesame Street. And the count had allegiance to the ruler, not to kin. So we've seen this before with the Mongols, an attempt to break kinship and make people loyal to a more abstract, kind of ruler. So he tries to do that. He tries to emulate the Roman military by keeping his army active at all times, and that seems to always be a real success. You keep your army busy all the time. They don't have time to sit around and go, I need some more loot. I'm all tapped out. But he keeps the Frankish practice of dividing the kingdom on the death of the ruler, and this is a bit of an issue, and it's going to take a long while to resolve. So when he dies in 511, his newly created kingdom, this big kingdom, is divided 3 ways into 3 separate kingdoms for his 3 sons. So you get Austrasia, that's Belgium and northeast France, Neustria, that's kind of central France, and Burgundy, which is the same. And this caused a number of other issues that they probably hadn't thought about. So which of the 3 kings would dominate? So you've got 3 sons, they're all rulers. Which is the most important? Is it the guy that's in central France? Is it the guy that's in northern France? The system of counts becomes a problem. We saw this in the Islamic world with the governors, the emirs becoming powerful. When people don't ever see the king, but they see the counts all the time, and you go to the counts for assistance, then the counts become the most important people in your life in terms of authority. So over time, not only are the counts being given land because there isn't a money economy, so they be given land for service, so they get more and more land, they become more powerful. You've got this parallel source of power, so that's an issue. And the other thing is that Merovingian kings were said to rule but not govern. So they're not really involved in the day-to-day running of the country or the empire at all, whether it's the 1, the 2, or the number 3 son. And the other problem that they have, of course, is that they have a series of child kings. And to be fair, at different times, the empire is reunited under, 2 of them or 1 of them. But overall, this is the problem, the division of territory. So you've got a series of child kings, and that decreases any hope of having an effective centralized power. And so real power comes to be held, well, in the locales, it's held by the counts, but at court, very interesting, it's held by a man, whoever it is that holds the position, mayor of the palace. Like our mayor. So mayor of the palace, and this is the really interesting position to watch, because it's through this position that the truly great next dynasty, the Carolingian dynasty of Charlemagne, it's through this that they come to power. So when the Carolingians come to power, they can't say we have a divine connection to God, because, you know, it runs in our family. So they have to go about it a different way. So you have to find out, you have to kind of say, we have the right to rule. Why do we have the right to rule? And what they're going to do is make a deal with the Christian church, the church in Rome. So the Carolingians come to power not because of their divine connection, but because one of the family holds this position, mayor of the palace, continues to hold it, and then eventually gets tired of being the power behind the throne and just kind of makes a run for it and says, right, I'm the king now, and of course seizes power. And so just to leave you with this, it's because it's great names again. Pepin II was mayor of the palace in Austrasia in the late 670s, and by the time he died, I think he died in 714, but by the time you get to about the 680s, he actually controlled all three parts of the kingdom, so the Neustria, Burgundy, and Austrasia. And he left only grandsons and an illegitimate son, and his illegitimate son was called Charles Martel, but he's my favorite because he's like a kind of WWF hero, Charles the Hammer Martel.
Nice.
Yeah, it's like, yeah. So you get Charles the Hammer Martel. So it's a civil war at the end of when Pepin dies, and then Charles the Hammer comes out victorious in the 720s, and he's also the leader that halts the Islamic advance, member the Battle of Poitiers in 732. So he's famous
Something
for
like that,
yeah, he's famous for that. And of course, his descendants and the people from that point on that rule are called the Carolingians, because Carolus is Latin for Charles. That's his name, so it's Carolingians, although some people say it's because of the really famous guy, Charlemagne, which is just Charles the Great, which is Carolus as well. So when Charles the Hammer Martel died in 741, his son Pepin the Short, and it's like, aw, that's a shame, takes over and maintains this fiction of still being just mayor of the palace, and then sets up puppet kings that he can control. But in about 751, with he decides with the help of the Pope that he's going to call himself king. So what he offers is papal protection. He says to the Pope, this is your territory, and I will protect this territory for you, the papal state, which is much bigger than it is today. And so I think it's Pope Stephen II says, yeah, good idea, yeah, you're king for sure. And then he's followed by his sons. They do the same thing, you divide up the kingdom. It's Carloman and Charles the Great, or Charlemagne. So he divides up the territory between them. But Carloman dies suddenly and mysteriously, and Charlemagne is left with the entire empire, and just brings us to these great heights that really is the new Europe, the new European order under the Carolingians. But they have to maintain this really strong connection with the church, because they weren't born to rule. They come up through this position, mayor of the palace. So it's really quite interesting, I think.
It is very interesting. And that wraps up our discussion about barbarians and barbarians on the move, and
this,
not so barbaric barbarians.
They're not on the move anymore. After this, they're barbarians who've settled and
become
they're civilized. Yeah, that's the word. The word of the day.
We'll see you next time on the History Hut.
Okay, bye.